Hi friends, of all the horrible 40k planets, Armageddon might be one of the horriblest. Much like Usain Bolt, Armageddon's name became prophetic as it experienced three major apocalyptic wars in the present time period. I only say present time period because before Armageddon, it was called Olinor, and it was obviously one of the planets involved in the Olinor Crusade. This was one of the biggest Imperial victories during the Great Crusade and the last major battle that the Emperor personally commanded. After their victory against the Orcs, the Emperor made Horus War Master and began working on his Webway project. But we aren't talking about 30k today. Let's jump 10,000 years in the future and get back to 40k. Armageddon is a large piece of garbage planet that falls into that magic zone of the worst place ever, but it's just too darn important to delete. Just like how we can't nuke the crackhead legions and gator swarms of Florida because, well, Disney World is an important fortress, the Imperium can't exterminate the Chaos Legions and Orc hordes of Armageddon because it's a significant industrial hub and it's also in a very important defensive position in the galaxy. So with that little preamble out of the way, let's get right into the first war for Armageddon. This war was primarily carried out by the Force of Chaos, notably including the World Eaters. The Chaos Legions are, as their name suggests, chaotic, so they often fight each other just as much as they fight other factions. However, on one fairly special day, Chaos Christmas came early when a Space Hulk, Devourer of Stars, appeared on a demon world. Much like a Fortnite battle bus, this Hulk was large enough to transport all the boys into an epic battle. So, since their sweet ride pulled up, a significant Chaos Force decided to halt their infighting and beat the shit out of the Imperium instead. A huge Chaos Force mobilized and prepared for a huge scrap! No! Stop! The Orcs are for later! Oh, and I also almost forgot to mention, but this force was led by a little guy you might know, Demon Primarch Angron. And if that doesn't ring a screaming bell, you might know him by his legal name, Angronius of Nucaria, Lord of the Red Sands. And if you aren't familiar with Mr. Angronius, he is an absolute total beast. Primarch's already bad news, so a mega-roided Demon Prince Primarch is even worse news. And so back to the Space Hulk, the Chaos Forces kind of took a hippie approach and kind of just let the waves take them wherever they needed to be. And they just so happened to land in a system with the name perfectly befitting an apocalyptic invasion. A big round of applause to the Warp for keeping things thematic. As the Chaotic Forces were on their road trip, the Imperials were already having a bad time in Armageddon. In the giant hive cities of the planet, the Planetary Defense Force were facing a number of revolts and general civil unrest. Luckily for the PDF, these revolts were mostly made up of malnourished, crackhead hive dwellers who probably haven't even seen the sun. So the PDF was able to deal with it without any outside reinforcements. Unfortunately for the PDF, they were able to deal with it without any outside reinforcements. Since they didn't call for any reinforcements, they would be very, very ill prepared for the incoming Chaos invasion. Hey, nice. We quelled these dang revolts. Another day, another PDF victory. What's that? That, my dear document format, would be the Space Hulk Devourer of Stars. Angron made planetfall and led his legions of marines, cultists, demons, and assorted freaks against the region of Armageddon Prime. The PDF proceeded to have the worst day ever as Angron's armies wreaked havoc across the lands, killing millions of Imperials shortly upon arrival. After some desperate fighting, the survivors fell back through the jungles into a secondary region, creatively named Armageddon Secondus, since it was second to Armageddon Prime, which was the first. And luckily for the Imperials, Angron was too busy emoting after his victory at Armageddon Prime, and he wasted valuable time erecting monuments to his victory and celebrating. In this time, the Imperials were able to regroup and the Space Wolf reinforcements finally arrived. Led by the legendary Logan Gribnar, the PDF, Steel Legion, and Space Wolves prepared their defenses for Angron's approaching armies. It was said that the Wolves were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, but luckily for them, they were fighting the World Eaters, not the Wolf Eaters. To even the odds, Grimnar led a daring assault on the World Eaters and lured them into a jungle trap in which the Wolves and Steel Legion killed a bunch of Marines. Afterwards, the Wolves attacked the weakened Chaos Force in an epic Berserker on Berserker river battle. Despite the Wolves making some progress against the Hordes, Angron was able to break through their defensive lines and make his way towards the Hive's Hell's Reach and Infernus. Hell's Reach will be more important later on, so keep it in mind. Realizing that Angron's worth 415 points while he's only a measly 145 points, Grimnar knew how absolutely hopeless it would be to fight the Demon Primarch, so he called for some Grey Knight reinforcements. The Grey Knights are a super secret, ultra elite anti-demon chapter of Space Marines, so of all the Marines, they had the best shot at vanquishing Angron. So, before Angron could make it to the Hive Cities, the Grey Knights teleported right in the center of his army and attacked the Primarch, while the Wolves led a final counterattack along with the Steel Legion. Angron was able to kill the knights with relative ease by stroking his ginormous black blade. With strokes of his black blade. But luckily for the knights, they had a named character amongst their ranks, and a knight named Hyperion used the power of faith, will, and friendship in order to shatter the black blade, which significantly weakened Angron. The knights pushed their advantage, and Grey Knight Captain Aurelian began to banish Angron. As he was being banished, the Demon Prince struck a mortal blow on the captain. But banishing Angron wasn't even the coolest thing Aurelian did that day. As Angron was being banished, he taunted Aurelian by saying how the captain's soul would be eaten by demons forever and ever. Tee-hee-hee. But Aurelian just said to this, "So be it," and then blasted Angron into the Shadow Realm. After Angron was banished, the demons weren't able to hold their material form and dissipated back into the warp. The remaining cultists, marines, and freaks were either killed or sent running by the Imperials. The marines and guard worked together to hunt down the Chaos Remnants, thus closing off the first war for Armageddon. Despite their victory, the Imperials suffered heavy losses, especially the Grey Knights, who only had 13 survivors out of the 109 sent. To make matters worse, the Inquisition arrived and ruined the celebration party. They deemed the Chaos exposure to be a threat and sent all the guardsmen and Imperial citizens who just heroically fought off a giant mega demonic invasion to work camps where they were sterilized and worked to death. Additionally, the Inquisition purged Imperial forces that tried to leave the planet. The Space Wolves took issue with this since they wanted to protect the people who fought alongside them. This led to a little thing called the Months of Shame, where the Wolves challenged the Inquisition and had a few bloody disagreements, but that's a video for another day. About half a century later, Armageddon lived up to its name once again as a massive orc war headed by the legendary war boss Gazkul Mag Uruk Thraka made its way to the Imperial world. Much like Angron, Gazkul is bad news. He is the prophet of the Wah, chosen by Gorkamork themselves. So, once again, Armageddon was ultra mega boned. To make even worse for them, the Space Hulk that Gaz and friends were riding on was really janky and it regularly got attacked by demons, which, for anyone else, would have been the end of their little trip, but for Gaz it was just a pregame. You see, orcs get stronger proportional to the might and number of opponents that they fight, so this was literally just XP grinding before the real Wah began. So then finally, a second apocalyptic Space Hulk arrived in Armageddon. The orcs destroyed the orbital defenses and made planetfall. Quite literally, as the Hulk fell from space onto the planet, along with orc ships called rocks, which are asteroids that the orcs carved nice little chairs in and strapped like a million guns to. The initial landing caused major damage to Armageddon Prime, and the Hulk itself completely destroyed Hive Ulfern. Then, to make matters even worse, there was a convenient warp storm that prevented Imperial reinforcements. Then, to make worse even worse, the Imperial Governor of Armageddon, Hermann von Straub, is perhaps the stupidest guy in the world and failed every single intelligence check he possibly could. When his advisors told him that they foresaw an orc invasion, he said, "No worries, I got that dog in me," even though he most definitely did not have that quote-unquote dog in him. Then, when ultra badass hero of the Imperium, Sebastian Yarrick, rightfully sent out a distress signal, crayon connoisseur Hermann banished Yarrick to Armageddon Secondus. The orc assault was relentless, and they were quickly overwhelming the forces of Armageddon Prime. The local PDF desperately tried to hold the line, but were broken nonetheless. So the Imperials once again had to fall back to Armageddon Secondus, which, if you remembered, absolute Chad Yarrick was recently banished to. So, there's still hope. But, once again, the orcs broke through the Imperial defenses and made their way towards Hive Hades. Luckily, the Imperials had the Iron Skull's Titan Legion to fight back the Greenskins. Unluckily, they were commanded by Glue Guzzler Hermann. Hermann ordered them to go into the middle of the fucking horde. The middle of an orc horde. The orcs, one of the iconic melee factions. Yeah, you Titans, you guys have ginormous cannons that basically shoot sunbeams and 1 trillion bullets. But yeah, go in the middle of the orc horde. Yeah, so this moron basically said, "Big sword go burr." And then he sent the Titans into the middle of the largest orc horde he could find and basically said, "Alright, do your due. Kill them all, please." In the battle, the Titans did quite well, all things considered, and killed many orcs. But they were eventually overwhelmed up close by the orc Gargants. The commander of the Iron Skulls, Curtis Mannheim, was an absolute beast and took down 3 Gargants all by himself before finally being critically wounded. Knowing it was over for him, he overloaded his Titan's reactor and caused a huge explosion that killed millions of orcs and gave the Imperials valuable time to regroup. Although the Titans were out for the rest of the war, Yarrick took charge of Hive Hades' defenses and prepared for the biggest battle of the war. Yarrick recruited the various gangers of the Hive and assembled a sizable army. The remaining orc Gargants bombarded the Hive while the invading force gathered to prepare for their assault. Soon after, Brainworms Hermann remembered that his family had a reserve of virus bombs that might just be useful against a giant invasion. He rushed the bombs into missiles and triumphantly redeemed himself when his plan went perfectly and he killed all the orcs. Everybody said, "We're sorry for calling you stupid, Herman. You were right all along. You are the true hero of the Imperium. You shall now be henceforth known as Herman the Hero, Imperial Saint." Yarick is an idiot, he was executed, and then Herman went on to single-handedly slay Ghazghkull, Abaddon, and the Silent King, and he brought peace to mankind. Haha, no, I'm just fucking with you. Just like his other plans, this one mostly failed as the bombs and missiles were super old and had some performance issues. To his credit though, the bombs did kill a fair bit of orcs, just not enough to stop the assault. It was at this time that Horrible Herman became the most relatable 40k character, and he went to his room to cry about his failures. On the other end of the competency spectrum, Yarick was leading the Imperials at Hive Hades, and they were valiantly repelling the Orc advances. With the bulk of the attacks being foiled, Ghazghkull stepped in to personally coordinate the attacks on the Hive. Gaz came up with a ton of strategies, some of which were even said to be told directly from Gork and Mork. He created huge siege weapons. He sent elite commando infiltration teams into the Hive's vents. He created even huger siege weapons. But, time after time, his plans were foiled by Yarick, so Ghazghkull sent one of his mightiest war bosses to kill the Commissar. War boss Ugelhard wrecked the perimeter defenses and eventually engaged Yarick in a duel. The war boss cut off Yarick's arm, but Yarick passed the feel no pain roll and decapitated Ugelhard with his chainsword. The absolute crab Chad Yarick held up the severed power claw, and then the remaining orc forces retreated in horror. Just imagine how much of an absolute Chad Yarick is for not only defeating a war boss in melee, but then using his iron balls and indomitable will to send a bunch of orcs pissing and crying away in fear. Meanwhile, in Hive Acheron, one of the only other surviving hives, the Imperials readied their defenses. They were ill-equipped and ragged, but they were inspired by Yarick's ongoing defense of Hive Hades. Dum Dum Herman also sent something nice. He sent them good luck wishes and 20 dudes to help defend the Hive. But the Hive's governor was not deterred, and he prepared for the incoming horde. The orcs led a massive frontal assault on the Hive when they were suddenly blasted from orbit. Space Marine reinforcements had finally arrived. The Blood Angels, Salamanders, and Ultramarines had turned the tide of the Battle of Acheron, and they secured the first Imperial victory of the war. Dante of the Blood Angels assumed control of the Imperial forces on planet, and contrary to all reason, Pinhead Herman was angered at the Space Marines' arrival since he, quote-unquote, had it all under control. Dante said, "I'm too old for this shit," and he arrested Herman. Eventually, Dimwit Herman did manage to escape on a land speeder, but of course he crashed like a moron. However, his core was never found. Back in Hades, Ghazghkull was finally making some progress as he ramped up his efforts and the Hive was running out of supplies and morale. Dante attempted to assassinate the war boss, but his efforts had failed. However, in one of the bloodiest battles of the Second War, the Marines were able to take back Hive Tartarus. In this battle, the orcs ran out of ammo and had to resort to full-on Oonga Boonga caveman tactics, using rocks and melee weapons to survive. In this battle, Ghazghkull was also supposedly killed when he got shot in the face with a bolter, but his body was never found, which, in literary terms, means he didn't die and he'll be back later. So don't worry, orc fans. With Gaz out of the picture, the remaining orc forces faltered and the Imperials were able to gain the upper hand. Hive Hades was eventually conquered by the orcs for a short time, but the Marines made their way to the Hive in order to aid the Imperial remnants. Only a few survived, and Yarick was found kicking amongst a bunch of slain orcs. Ghazghkull, who was of course not dead, made one final attempt to take the planet, but he ultimately failed and decided to retreat to his space hulk so he could regroup his forces. After Ghazghkull left, the Imperials basically just cleaned up the rest of the orcs and they retook Armageddon Prime, successfully defending the world yet again. Ghazghkull decided that this was a mere practice run and he prepared for a sequel. Speaking of sequels, you may have noticed I only talked about 2 wars in this video, even though I said there were 3 major wars. But don't worry, I do know how to count. However, this video would have been way too long if I covered all 3 of them, so I'll cover the 3rd war for Armageddon along with the legendary battle of Hell's Reach in next week's video, so stay tuned for part 2 of the wars for Armageddon. And with that, I hope everyone enjoyed this week's video. The wars for Armageddon are some of the most iconic battles in 40k, and they have some of the coolest characters. Yarick, Ghazghkull, and Angron are all super iconic and formidable foes, which makes for some awesome stories. Oh, and how can I forget, Simpleton Herman, true hero of the Imperium, was there too. But anyways, as always, please like, comment, subscribe, and consider sharing to all your favorite Marines, Greenskins, and assorted freaks. I'd also like to thank my patrons for supporting the channel a little extra, it really does help. And thank you to everyone who's recently subscribed and got the channel to 10k. That's just absolutely awesome. I couldn't be happier about the reception to my silly little videos. So again, thanks. Man, I wish we could just get a Simpleton Herman von Straub model. He'd cost like 200 points and he'd have a 12-inch debuff aura. Ah, a man can dream.